Long rambling video mode engaged. You guys are bitch that I talk too much. Click away right now. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your breath in the comments. Go away, because we're going to talk. So first things first, I have to go back to yesterday's video where we were talking about the disclaimer on the package that these cylinder heads came in. That talked about hydraulic flat tappet only. And a lot of you guys missed my point. I caught so much flack in the comments over this. Mostly because I don't think you really understood what I was trying to say. To label something as hydraulic flat tappet only is grossly overgeneralizing what these heads can be used for. So, for instance, hydraulic flat tappet cam. Am I going to use a stock 390,000th lift stock hydraulic cam, or am I going to use a 580 lift hydraulic cam that's got aggressive profiles? Am I using, is this a cam that is all done by 5,000 RPM, or is this a cam that only starts at, let's say, 5,000, 4,000, 5,000 and goes to like 6,500? The label hydraulic flat tappet only says nothing, instead of just giving the spec of the valve, and this is what, or the spring I should say, and this is the range that it's good for. So it's the blanket statement of hydraulic, and even you go to roller, okay? So hydraulic flat tappet only, well, that means that if I was to just slip a stock factory, very mild roller cam in here, hydraulic roller cam, that these springs aren't of any, there's just the gross generalization disclaimer is really what I was having a problem with. There's so many people trying to school me on valve springs. I know, I get all of that, but just that blanket statement tells me absolutely nothing. That said, all right. Now, other people were, okay, two other things I have to cover on the cylinder heads. One was, why don't you just use an iron head? Iron heads are better. Yeah, iron heads are great. The reason I told him to go specifically for a set of aluminum heads, aluminum aftermarket heads, is because of the car that it's going in. His car, this Chevy Impala, is slammed. It's already on the ground. Okay, so rather than having to rework the whole front suspension, I figured, well, let's save 75 or 100 pounds off the nose of this thing by using a set of aluminum heads and more closely match the weight of the small block that's already in the car, which is why I said just pick up a set of replacement aluminum cylinder heads. In other words, nothing exotic, no race heads or anything like that, just the most basic aluminum heads. It's because of the car. Yes, I know. Iron heads are great. I love iron heads. But that's, you're not taking everything into account when you make statements like that. And there's a reason why I wanted the aluminum over steel. Now, the other thing was Speedmaster. Okay, so now I understand, I completely get it. There is one factory in the Ding Dong Providence where all of these heads are manufactured. I get that, okay? And they all go to, Speedmaster gets them, Jegs gets them, Summit gets them, all these different companies get them. The reason I didn't want to go with Speedmaster specifically is because Speedmaster, as the distributor for these things, their version of it, or Speedmaster, we did a video earlier this year where they took a valve body that was manufactured by an individual here in the States. They took a valve body, copied it exactly, including his logo, and put it on their website for sale. It was the most obscene thing. I did a whole video on that. You can go back and search for it. But I was like, no, okay, I understand it's going to be the same basic head coming from all of these different places. But Speedmaster itself, as the distributor, I'm not going to give them a penny because they out and out counterfeit parts, make no bones about it. So that's why I've rejected the idea of Speedmaster. So that said, all of that out of the way, and I hope I clarified things. Let's talk about my relationship with the Big Block Chevy. Like, this is confessions of a Mopar guy. My love for the Big Block Chevy, and I've always had it. Okay, so you have to understand, when I was a kid growing up, I was obsessed. I was eat up with drag racing, with professional drag racing. And you have to understand that professional drag racing then, and things like Top Fuel and Funny Car back then, were nothing at all like what you see today. Nothing like the elitist type of thing that's out there today. Back in the 70s and the 80s, when I was a kid growing up, professional drag racing was much more relatable. And you had hundreds of independent Top Fuel and Funny Car teams spread all over the country, running all different kinds of events, not just this cluster of NHRA national events, but I mean, IHRA, NHRA, AHRA, PRO, like there were, and then of course all the independent races. They were everywhere. It was much more relatable. When you go to the track to see a Top Fuel race, it was a bunch of guys in t-shirts, greasy t-shirts, no ropes, no 18-wheelers, no nothing, just hot rodders, regular guys flogging on their cars. And this was the relationship, the mental relationship I had with professional drag racing at that time. It was something that I aspired to. I wanted to burn nitro like these other guys. And these were regular guys. They weren't billionaires, okay? So just to put that into perspective, like you have to understand the context, where this all came from. So been a Mopar guy since birth. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I've always just had this affinity to all things Mopar. All right. Now, at this period of time, the early to middle 70s, I was a young teenager, and like I said, completely obsessed, completely eat up with professional drag racing and a Mopar guy. So there was always that sense of pride. You know what I mean? That yes, we own the quickest and fastest cars in the world, are all powered by Chryslers. So the superiority, remember now, you have the time and the place. So the superiority complex was there, right? Great pride in this. But then in 1975, there was a guy named Jim Booker who ran the car was sponsored by Kenner SSP, the toy company, who ran a Chevy Big Block Dragster. And the automotive media at the time was paying a lot of attention to him, and he was running really good numbers, really solid, really consistent. And then at the 1975 Summer Nationals, he won. He won the 75 Summer Nationals with a Big Block Chevy. I thought this was the most fascinating thing. I thought this was great because this was a true underdog. This guy all of a sudden became a hero in my mind because he beat everybody. He beat all of the Chryslers. He beat the Garlitzes. He beat, you see what I'm saying? Amazing. This was amazing. At that point, it didn't matter to me that it wasn't a Mopar. It was like, yes, you go get the big guys, right? It was, the David versus Goliath thing, right? So that left a real impression in my head. And I was always like, what did this guy know about these engines, about these Chevy engines that nobody else did, that he was able, and he ran, oh God, I don't remember, I think he ran like a 607, where at the time, like a 590 was a big deal, okay? So he was right there in the thick of things with this. And I was like, what does this guy know? What magic does this guy have to make the Chevy engine run ahead of the Chryslers like this? Maybe not consistently, but he reached up and did it. Left a big impression on me. So with that, a curiosity for these engines was born. Now at the same time, I'm a teenager and I'm out on the street and I'm playing with my Mopars and I'm surrounded by Mopar people and we're doing our Mopar thing. We've got our Mopar pride. And there was a bit of jealousy on my part, okay, towards the Chevy guys. Because while collectively, right, we had the Hemi. Collectively as Mopar guys, we had the Hemi. As individuals, we didn't. Now, you have to understand something. Again, context is everything. Let's call the year 1980, okay, because this is about my formative years with this stuff. So, 1980. You have to understand that there are more 426 Hemis out and about in circulation today than there were back then. Okay? I know it sounds hard to believe, it's hard to understand, but at the time, the only Hemis that were available to the guys like on the street were factory-produced Hemi cars, Roadrunners and Chargers and Challengers and stuff like that. They had that 426 Hemi used to be a Hemi car, right? Well, Chrysler only built about 11,000 of them total from 1966 to 1971. And half of them were like gone, by 73, 74, either blown up or repurposed as race cars, or the motors were pulled and thrown into nitro cars. So a 426 Hemi on the street in the 1980s, early 1980s, was a very rare sight. It was a big deal to see a Hemi car. Not for the Chevy guys, though. The Chevy guys, they had their big blocks. They were everywhere. Obviously, they were outnumbered by the small blocks, which were truly a dime a dozen, and that's one of the things that turned me off to the small block Chevy. Even though I've built many small block Chevys, I was always like, well, it's kind of the belly button thing. It's the easy way out, We used to laugh about Chevy, small block Chevy guys just not being intelligent enough to work with anything else. I love small block Chevys, just for the record. But there was that thing where the Chevy guy can literally go to the wrecking yard, pick up a 396 or a 454, or just go to the used car lot, and there's always going to be a big block something sitting at the back row. Remember in 1980, then you could have it for a song. So there was that bit of jealousy there. Collectively we had the Hemi, but as individuals, we didn't. So fast forward a couple of years, and now it's the 1990s. And I'm deep in the nitro thing. I'm all over the place. I'm bouncing all over the map, from car to car, from thing to thing. And I'm just completely in the world of nitro, various nitro vehicles, okay? And I get a chance, I hear about a stash of old Top Fuel parts that were from a car called the Outer Limits. This was a Jersey car, a local car. And just the old parts that were running this car, and I needed to see them. I wanted to examine them because I'm so familiar with the 426 Hemi at this point that I really want to see what made up a nitro big block Chevy. So I got to examine these parts, and I got to talk to a guy who was involved in the running of that car. Again, this is about 10 years after the car was, no, it's closer to 20. It's about 15 to 20 years after the car was retired. So these were just old, obsolete parts. And I learned something interesting at this period of time. And that's that one of the problems with the Chevy, detonation, right? They were known for detonating on nitro. And one of the things that they had to deal with at that point was number 7 cylinder. The number 7 cylinder got special treatment. The number 7 cylinder was the one that was always a problem. Okay, now on the 426 Hemi, number 6 is the problem cylinder. Now, and they're the same 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8. They're set up the same way, the 426 Hemi and the Big Block Chevy, as far as firing order goes. But the positioning of the ports in the intake valve on nitro makes a difference, because the plenum of a nitro engine is wet with fuel. Okay, it's not a mist that's going in. Some of it is beaten into a mist by the blower and all that, but the plenum is just this big open space, and it's got puddles of liquid in it. So when you hit the throttle, all of that liquid heads backwards. Okay. And that's why the stagger, this tune-up stagger on a nitro car always has the biggest nozzles at the front and the smallest nozzles at the back. Because when the car accelerates, all that liquid nitro in the plenum heads back and goes to the cylinder, so you don't have to feed it that way through the injector. So this got me thinking, okay? And I was like, why? What's the key difference between the Chrysler and the Chevy? The Chrysler has a problem with number 6, and the Chevy has a problem with number 7. Opposite sides of the engine, and not quite in the middle. So, all right, it has the firing order 1843657 Both of these engines share the same firing order. So on the nitro motor, number 3 and number 5 are next to each other. And the way they appear in the firing order steel mixture from number 6. So number 6 is always a little on the lean side. Number 6 is the problem cylinder on a 426 Hemi. Number 7 on a Chevy is the same issue, but what's happening is 5 is stealing the liquid from 7. See, so as the fuel comes back, 5 opens first and it grabs that wave of liquid nitro, pulls the lion's share of it in, and then 7 follows it immediately in the firing order, and it gets a lesser gulp. So what they would do with the Chevy motors to combat that is run a lower compression piston in the number 7 cylinder. It was very interesting, okay? Quick post-video edit insert here. The difference between the Chevy intake spacing and the Chrysler is that the Chevy has the intake ports Siamese like this, where the Chrysler has them evenly spaced. I didn't make that clear. Okay, back to the video. So that was the one aspect of it that I learned at that point. And then I started to observe other characteristics of Chevy, not just big block, but Chevy nitro motors, small block and big block. And I noticed that, and this was always legendary, that nothing is louder than a Chevy motor or nitro. And this doesn't make any sense, right? Why would a Chevy motor be louder than a Chrysler motor or nitro? Well, at about this period of time, I was focused in on the relationship between, from a tuning aspect, I was focused in on the relationship between piston speed, specifically deceleration, right? Piston speed, as it decelerates, as it goes past 90 degrees past top dead center on its way to 180, it's slowing down and it stops at 180. The Chrysler has a longer rod. Now, okay, go back to this. We were talking about camshafts, right? I found, through screwing around with the Chrysler motors, that there was a direct relationship between exhaust valve opening point, where the exhaust valve starts to open, right, and rod ratio, rod length. So the longer the rod, okay, the slower the deceleration rate past 90 degrees. So a short rod motor, you have maximum speed always at 90, okay, and then you have 0 always at 180. But a shorter rod motor, the acceleration rate away from top dead and then the acceleration rate on its way to 0 are faster. The piston speed is faster there. The Chrysler, by its architecture, has a longer rod. We were running 7-inch plus 40 rods at the time. That was like the standard. I have no idea what they're running today. Where the Chevy rod was 3/4 of an inch shorter. And so the Chevy had a quicker deceleration rate from 90 to bottom. Now, at this point, from 90 to 180, the exhaust valve is open and opening wider. The reason I deduced at this point that the Chevy motors are notably louder, notably sharper, their tone on nitro, than Chrysler engines is because that deceleration rate, that rapid deceleration rate because of the shorter rod, means that that still expanding pressure pulse, which is where nitro makes its power from, that still expanding pressure pulse now bounces off the top of the piston, and you're hearing the echo off the top of the piston. So that's why Chevy motors, Chevy nitro motors, sound so freaking sharp. It has nothing to do with the cylinder head. It has to do with the shorter rod architecture and the quicker deceleration rate at the bottom of the stroke. So now I stick this other factoid in my head. Okay, we've got fuel distribution and we have the short rod situation, right? So now, like, I'm putting together in my mind what an optimum Chevy setup would be. Then I got completely away from, like, I walked away from like nitro racing in 1998, 1999. But a couple of years later, I started playing around with a couple of different, just nostalgia cars, just bouncing from car to car. Nothing of any, no serious pursuit. But I still had friends that were in there. And I did a lot of brainstorming with Pete Jensen And I met a guy named Dick Gaylord, and we became fast friends. Dick was an unusual character. He was a hard guy to be friends with. I'm accused of the same thing. I'm a hard guy to be friends with too. But we hit it off, right? You just had to understand Dick. That's what it was. But we became good friends. And Dick was old at the time. He was around 70. And this is, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago. So Dick and I had worked together on a couple of different nostalgia top fuel cars, and we had our run-ins. But I loved him, and Dick, you know. So anyway, make a long story short, he says to me, "I want to build a Chevy top fuel car. I want to build a Chevy nostalgia top fuel car." And I was like, "Bro, I am so with you. I've been studying these motors. I've been looking at them and trying to understand them and how to make them work for years. And yeah, absolutely, count me in." So at that point, I says, "Okay, I'm going to dive back into this nitro thing hardcore." So, ironically enough, at about the same time, I had another friend in Knoxville, Jim Arrow, and he wanted to build a Camaro top fueler. And I was actually working with him also, because the Camaro was another engine that I studied extensively. But we're talking about Chevys here now. So I says, I'm all in, bro. I'm all in. So he was going to build the car at his place up in New York, and I was going to do a little research, and he was going to send me engine parts, and we were going to come up with a combination of rod length, valve with the correct sequence, and a distribution, a fuel distribution system to try to overcome the shortcomings of this engine. So I was very excited about this. I was stoked. At the time, I had a coffee house. I turned wrenches during the day, and at night I ran a coffee house. And I remember Dick would call me every night, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and we would sit on the phone for 2-3 hours, every friggin' night, talking about all the little details, all the things we were going to try, and we were going to score this part, and so on and so forth. And the whole time Dick is building this car. So I'm telling you, guys, I was really stoked about this. Mopar, I gotta go out and slaughter the Mopars with a Chevy. Yeah, let's do this thing, right? So then Dick died, and he was old, right? So he was in the process of building the car. He had taken a really long time on the oil tank. Now, this is rambling, but okay, bear with me. He was taking a really long time on the oil tank, and again, he was in his 70s. So he was spending all kinds of time working on this dry sump system, a special dry sump system he had in his mind that he wanted to use. And I remember one night telling him, "Dick, listen, you're going to be dead before you get this oil system worked out. So let's just go out with a wet sump and make this thing work, and then next year you can do the oil sump." And about a week after I said that to him, he died. That's just the way it goes. So, but anyway, that was the end of my involvement, and really any interest at all in not nitro or even Chevys on nitro. But I've always had a fascination, a jealousy, a bit of a jealousy, and a love for the Big Block Chevy. At this stage in my life, I have no interest in pursuing that sort of thing anymore. Everything has moved past. Everything has moved past the point where it's relevant or you know what I mean? That world of nitro is gone. It was gone back then too, but there were still echoes of it, like with old timers like Dick. But it's all gone now, and now it's a new world, and I'm into the new world. I like the new world. No, I don't like what has become a professional drag racing. I like the no prep stuff, and it's all very reminiscent. The things that happen today in the no prep world, the grudge world, very closely echo what nitro racing was like in the 1970s and the 1980s. But again, my days of going out and trying to hit the road and spend time on the interstate and the hours, the endless hours, and the total dedication to something like that, That ship has sailed a long time ago. I'm very content to just sit here and reminisce about this stuff on YouTube. No, I hate to reminisce. I like to talk about it. I got a lot of stuff between my ears. I'm trying to get it out. So yeah, that's my love for the Big Block Chevy. And for the record, and I have said this many times, I've said this countless times, since really the 1980s, the Big Block Chevy truly is the ultimate American V8. Because when you stop and you think about it, okay, in today's world where there are no rules, restrictions in drag racing, right, or really any motorsport at this point, where there's no rule restrictions, the Chevy, the basic Chevy design, right, dominates. These guys can run anything. They can run 426 Hemys, and some of them do. They can run cameras. Not a single one does. The occasional guy pops up with a Boss Ford, but just to prove my point about how the Big Block Chevy is the ultimate American V8 internal combustion engine. Chrysler knew it. Chrysler knew it. Chrysler knew this because when they planned on redesigning their Big Block series, the big engine series, it was supposed to come about in 1972. So they started work on developing these things in like 1969. Chrysler's answer was to combine the wedge, the Big Block wedge, and the 426 Hemi into one engine, and it was called the Ball Stud Hemi. I did a magazine article on the Ball Stud Hemi back in the 1980s. And it's resurfaced again, and I think I did a video, I did a video on the Ball Stud Hemi a couple of years ago. And Chrysler knew the superiority of the Chevy combustion chamber, the Chevy layout, as far as normally aspirated performance goes. And the Ball Stud was literally a big block, a 400 or 440 block. They had both sizes planned with a Chevy cylinder head on it. Canted valves, Chevy combustion chamber, Chevy, it got the name the Ball Stud from the rockers, and they did away with the rocker shafts. And the predecessor to the wedge and 426 Hemi was literally going to be an exact copy of the Big Block Chevy cylinder head. So even back then, Chrysler knew that in the future, as things develop, as combustion chamber science evolves, as camshaft science evolves, as induction evolves, that eventually the way to go is going to be canted valves and a semi-Hemi combustion chamber. So they knew it, and I know it too. The Big Block Chevy is the undisputed king of normally aspirated horsepower. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, yeah, 28 minutes. You guys stuck around for all of this, thank you. All right, that's it. I'll see you tomorrow.